Not that deep silence you hear when 200 people stop talking at once. I had never heard that before that night. I have listened in a lot of silences. The silence of a home where you shouldn't ask. The silence of a phone that isn't ringing to wish me happy birthday. The silence of family quietly confirming that I am not one they show off on Facebook to all their friends. I guess you could say I am a sort of silence connoisseur. But the silence of 200 people likely going quiet all at once, through a ballroom, with the band between songs stopped and glasses mid-clink, that one was new. And I was in the very middle of it. Allow me to be a little more specific on where I was. We sat at table 11, not the family table, not up front. Table 11 off to the side, in that section where you put the guests who have to be invited but never featured. Grays and blacks mixed with dark colors. I was there to watch her get married in a ballroom that I paid for, eat food that I paid for, watch as she danced in a dress that I had paid for, and then leave quietly behind the scenes with nothing but tucked up inside of me, having given her the one thing that I could give her. An absolutely perfect day, no string attached, no one knowing it came from me. That was the plan. I would like for you to know that really was the plan. I did not attend this wedding to perform the following to you. I came to disappear into it. Then a woman from the next table, an older woman, someone I knew, a family friend of my mother's who I vaguely recognized, leaned in toward the head table at a pause in conversation and asked my sister Brooke one question. She gestured toward me. She said, "Brooke, honey, who dat? Is she with the venue?" And my sister Brooke, glowing in her gown, in her moment, among the hundreds of family and friends who had gathered to celebrate her, turned around toward me. She looked right at me. Whatever she felt in that half second, whatever swirling combo platter of shame and reflex, and the particularity of cruelty that lies within reach for any human who has never had to think about whether they were loved a day or an hour in their life, she made a decision. She laughed, lightly, like you would laugh at something not worthy of an actual answer. And so she said, loud enough for the tables around us to hear, "Oh, her? She's just the help." And the tables surrounding us heard this. And then the tables at those tables listened. Because when something like that happens, it travels around a room like a crack in glass. Then the band, between songs, simply didn't pick up the next song. And the clinking stopped. And 200 murmurers hushed at once. And I stood up. I will say to you that I stood up out of a great plan, a long-prepared time of justice. I didn't. I got up because something inside of me that had been sitting down for 34 years simply, finally stood. I reached into my bag. I took out my phone. And in the silence of 200 people, I opened it to the one document I had. This piece I'd reviewed on the drive because something compelled me, but that I could honestly not explain why at that moment, and started reading. Stay with me. Because what I heard in that silence was not a sermon. It was an invoice. And when I was done reading it, my sister wasn't smiling anymore, and Mother had gotten to her feet, and 200 people saw something in here about the help that had taken my own family generation after generation to willfully not see. Let me take you back. Before you can appreciate what it meant for me to stand, I must tell you who I was to them. Each family has a narrative it tells about itself, and within that narrative are roles for each person, and they get assigned early, to roll into the concrete as if dry cement were poured around us so we could never move anywhere else. In the tale of my family, I had a sister, Brooke, that was the smart one, the pretty one, the one with the future. And I was the other one, the disappointment. The cautionary tale they could, with a tone of calm concern or even fondness, reference when Brooke needed reminding that if you didn't apply yourself. For the record, I was not a disaster. I want to be clear about that. Disappointment sounds bad, but the truth was quieter and arguably worse. I was a good enough kid, just not the kid they wanted. Brooke is only 3 years younger, but she belonged from her very first minute. Gregarious where I was shy, traditionally ambitious where I was weird, interested in exactly what my parents valued and in the exact way that they valued it. She wanted the right school, the right friends, and to live the right life. I wanted to create things, dismantle them, and determine their functionality. My parents, when they looked at Brooke, saw the better versions of themselves. They looked at me as if I were some kind of problem that they didn't know where to find. My mother, Diane, was not a monster. I have to say that early because she comes back into play later, and because the truth about my mother is a more complicated truth than the truth about any of the rest of them. My mom was a woman who had married into a certain image and spent her life maintaining that image, which took a crapload of energy. And somewhere in the budgeting of this energy, I had become a line item on the spreadsheet that lived at the bottom of the page. She loved me. I believe that now, in a way I could not always believe it then. But she loved me like you love something that you've given up hope of understanding and trying to understand any longer. From a little distance with baffled tenderness, hoping things turn out all right, but not actually being quite sure how I would get there. My father, Gerald, was simpler. My father had made an assessment of who I was when I was 12, and he never changed it. To him, I was the daughter who had her own mind, who defied his will, who made him cringe a little at parties for not having the right answers to the questions men like my father ask children of men like my father's. And what are you going to do about yourself? For years he asked me that, the way a teacher can, and the tone was as though he had already concluded nothing. But Brooke was exposed to the family story as children are, by absorption, and her line in it came quickly. She was the star. I was the backdrop. A person who is raised from childhood to understand that their sibling is the set usually does not grow up treating that sibling as a real, live, full human being. She learned to ignore me like you grow so used to an old piece of furniture that it eventually becomes invisible. Not with hatred, with something worse than hatred, with the complete lack of attention. I left at 23, and this is what nobody in my family ever understood. But since they weren't really paying attention, it shouldn't surprise anybody. When I left, it was not a failure. I disappeared on purpose. And in the area they were no longer looking at, I created something none of them thought possible. The last day I explained myself to my family was a Sunday, which I recall the same way you remember when a long fever finally breaks. Not with drama, but relief. The kind of physical reprieve that comes from stopping something sneaky that has worn you down for years. It was a family dinner. There had been 100 like it, and I figured there would be another 100 like it. And at this one, my father had asked me the question he always asks, and, "What are you up to these days?" in the way he always does, ever so slightly incredulous, like a person trying to convince the whole room that her life choices were legitimate. I was working in events. I was working for a small company that did corporate and wedding work, learning the business from the inside. I was good at it, had opinions about how things could be done better. And I started to say some of this and watched my father do with his eyes what he did when we got serious at dinner. The slight glaze, the polite face of waiting for me to finish so conversation could move on to Brooke. In the middle of her sentence, I froze. Not dramatically. I just stopped. I completed the thought in some minimal way, and I let her move on to Brooke, and sat through the rest of dinner. Then, with perfect understanding, I realized, for 23 years now, literally all I had been doing was explaining myself to these people. But no explanation ever made an impression, and none ever would. Because the trouble wasn't that they didn't know me. The issue was, they had made a decision about who I was a long time ago. And it was going to take more than information to change their minds. Even if I became the first person on Mars, they'd file it in as, "Well, I'm glad she finally got her act together." Or some other bullshit grade for a remedial class student that barely scraped by. So I stopped. I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. I stopped attending dinners with proof of my own value, thinking this would be the time it stuck. I began to provide them the version of me they had already chosen. Vague, quiet, uninteresting. Because it was free to act out a disappointment for people who weren't going to witness anything else anyway. And it spared me the particular fatigue of attempting visibility from someone with their eyes closed. Looking back, I realize that was the healthiest thing I ever did. At 23, I just did not have a way with words to put it. I thought I was giving up. I was really releasing myself. That energy turned somewhere, because I had been pouring energy into getting seen by my family for so long that drain would not simply be closed and the sink left full. And into the work is where it went. All of it. All of the wanting to be seen, repurposed into creating something that required no one to ask for permission to exist. They thought I'd given up. They spun it that way for years. She just kind of floats around, you know how she is. They had no idea. They had quit searching for exactly as I'd orchestrated, and into the gloom of their not searching, I was constructing the thing that would, a decade later, foot the bill for my sister's entire wedding. I launched the business at 26 years of age with $8,000, a borrowed van, and a very focused awareness of how everything about the events industry was wrong. When I had worked for others, looked at it from the inside, how the business operated, I had learned that this whole industry was based on a sort of sad, bulging, panicked chaos. Lovely results carefully disguised as chaos. Every damn thing scrambling out of disaster and into excellent experiences, while clients were charged an arm leg for the price tag accompanying them with knowing how stressful it would be. I had also found out that I was one of the few people in the industry who actually excelled at the one thing our industry is terrible at: logistics, the systems, the nerdy infrastructure of successfully orchestrating a complex thing. It turned out I was not the artistic visionary. There were tons of those. I was the person that turned the artistic vision into reality, on time, on budget, and nobody cried in a supply closet, which is what I built a company around. Not a flashy company, a reliable one. First, we did corporate events, the unsexy bread and butter, conferences and product launches, and the type of thing that companies need to be done perfectly, with money being no object. I lowered the price, started delivering stressless services in as little as 2 weeks, and soon outstripped these chaos merchants on quality. And within 2 years, my client list included renewals only, because what I was actually selling was no panic at all. So once a firm has had an event that didn't want them to die, then they never go back. Afterward, we went into the hospitality sector, collaborating with venues and overseeing their event operations, eventually buying a stake in a couple of them. At 31, I had a system-obsessed business partner named Tomas, a team of 40 people, and one of the region's quieter big event and hospitality operations. Not famous. We didn't do famous. We did the million-dollar weddings and galas and corporate functions for people who could afford the very best and wanted to get it done. We got that done, and we were paid well for it. I want to share with you what it was like to make that, because that's the narrative I'm up against. It's the opposite of what my family thinks round one of me. For the first time, I truly experienced feeling fully myself. All those skills they had disregarded, the reticence, the oddness, the interest in how things worked, became precisely the building blocks of what I excelled at. The less-than-perfect daughter was instead a perfect fit for something my family had never even considered valuing. I was more than a joke who got lucky. I was a type of great that my family literally did not have a box to put. My mom knew I was working in events. That was the extent of it. One time, years later, she asked if I was still doing the party planning thing, and I said yes. She said that sounded nice and moved on. They never asked the scale. They never asked the name. No one ever asked whether the odd, quiet daughter could have constructed it. The not ask was so complete that I could have been managing half the events they went to and they would never have known. Well, it turned out I was going to run the biggest one of all. And they still wouldn't know. That is, until I told them. Brooke dialed my number to tell me that she is getting married, which was big news because Brooke never called me. By this time, our relationship had been reduced to holidays and the occasional group text, maintenance-level contact between siblings who share parents, but not much more. Therefore, when my phone face lit up with her name on a Tuesday night, I knew it was something. She was happy. And I was really, honestly glad for her. And I want to add that because the story I'm about to tell could make it sound like I'd been so eager to hate her. But I haven't been. She had indeed met a man, called Connor, who was nice and steady and from a good family. They were getting married, and her happiness on the phone was true and uncomplicated. For 2 minutes, we were just two sisters, and one of them had some come news. I told her I was thrilled. I meant it. That came later, the wedding talk. In fact, over many weeks, and with a texture that I immediately recognized because, on the one hand, I had literally spent my entire career reading exactly this texture from clients. Financial strain masquerading as excitement. Brooke and my parents were trying to plan the wedding that a family image demanded, but which no budget would bear. My parents had been pretending to a kind of wealth they have never actually owned for 30 years. The right neighborhood, the right cars, the right schools. All leveraged, all at the ragged edges of what was truly sustainable education and life. I had always sensed this. Starting a business teaches you to read the difference between how much someone shows and how much they actually have. My fam's was always wide. The wedding raised the gap to a crisis level. Brooke wanted a whole entire 200 guests, the venue as is, and the full production. My parents had promised the wedding of the family aesthetic to her, but at some point in the planning, I heard, through the group texts, on my mother's precise wording, through the things Brooke did say and didn't, a family's particular sound of finding out that it was going to be more expensive, making it look like a family could afford dignity, than actually having all that dignified time. Nobody asked me for help. Let me put that in bold for you. It would never have occurred to them that it might be appropriate for them to ask me for assistance, because in the family narrative, I was someone needing help rather than someone giving it. The disappointment is not asked to pay for the wedding, and the disappointment is seated at table 11. But I had the money. Now I had more money than my whole family put together, in accounts they didn't know existed, coming from a company they'd never been asked the name of, and that my sister's dream wedding was about to collapse into a much smaller version of itself, because Mom and Dad have been pretending all these years to be people they couldn't ever fully afford to be. And I made a decision. I told myself in silence, just as I do everything. Then I thought, why I give the wedding to my sister? All of it. And I declared that no one would ever know it was me. I want to say this part so to subtly vimamanamina, because it told the most about who I was at the time and what I was still waiting for. So it's not 180T to non my own. I could have told them. I could have been like, hey, Mom and Dad, I'm rich now. Let me pay for Brooke's wedding and write it down as my present to her. And that would have been the case in a functional family, and it would have been beautiful, and my family would have told their story of me differently going forward, with awe and gratitude. But that was not to be. But I knew my family, and I knew when offering to pay that two things would happen. They would either refuse, out of pride, out of the inability to come to terms with the fact that in this disappointment had become grower up into provider, and out of that familiar discomfort we wince at when someone we've condescended upon seems now to be looking down on us from a great height. Or they would accept, and the acceptance would curdle, for each dollar a reminder of an ordering of things to which they not only did not subscribe, but which had been directly addressed in braided road sections weeping pink blossoms, as though any word other than love might be perverse or somehow blasphemous, and all the poetry and pleasantries instantly sullied. And who could resent the gift more than themselves as it gleamed on its fresh footprint toward the altar like an unsolicited sacrificial dagger? So I chose a third path. I would pay for it all, and I would route the money so no one even knew it was me, and Brooke could have this perfect day of hers, and my parents could get to believe they had made it happen, the family image preserved, and I could get the satisfaction of having given my sister something prodigious without wanting anything in return. It was the most loving version, I told myself, a gift with no hook in it, a gift so pure that the recipient didn't even know to feel guilty. I believed that. You sat at my desk, planned how to secretly finance the wedding of my sister, so yes, I thought it was real. In my mind, I was doing the most holy thing a person could do. Others were supposed to be seen and appreciated as fullness in your picture, but I wanted to remain invisible. Giving without expecting any recognition, helping without thanks, loving a family who had never loved me back in their specifically defined currency, which was money, and not wanting anything from it. What I didn't quite understand yet, though, the lesson that the wedding itself would impart in front of 200 friends, was how one could tell a gift from an erasure. That opting not to be seen in order to allow those whose eyes are shut tighter than the doors on their coffins can stay comfortable is not always generosity. It is sometimes the old wound masquerading as a gift. Sometimes the kindest option is not to ghost someone more politely, to finally be truly seen. But I didn't know that yet. By that point, I knew all I had was a company with the capability to produce a 200-person wedding, a sister who needed one and wouldn't overknow any of this. So I started to build it. My entire life, all of these confounding scenarios were made possible by being me, not who my family thought I was. My firm had relationships with all major venues. We had all the catering partners, we have floral partnerships, entire supply chain of high-end events at a reduced rate because we pushed so much volume through it. A wedding that would have been an unlimited family bankrupting number at retail prices cost me, through the business's relationships from before I ever even started working with them, a fraction of that. A lot of money still, but enough money that someone like myself could comfortably absorb as a gift without losing their mind. I set it up carefully. Brooke wanted this venue, I knew it. Held events with her there, had a direct phone line into the events director. I called her myself. I told him that I wanted to pay for my sister's wedding anonymously. The family wasn't to know where the money came from, and that it should be booked with the appearance of being paid in full by my parents. She was an events director who had known me for years and completely trusted me, so she instantly got it and set that up for me just as I requested. The catering, the flowers, the production, all of it as if it were coming out of my business's accounts, appearing for my family like the cost of the wedding, but strangely low enough that they could only assume they'd lucked into pricing, or that the venue was more affordable than they had expected. I even handled the dress. Brooke had taken a fancy to a designer dress which simply wasn't something the family could afford, and I was, hush-hush, arranging with an outlet for her to buy it at sample sale prices that were less than the real cost, but considerably more than what she would be paying. I stumped up the difference. She had strutted out of the boutique, having believed she had landed upon a miracle deal. The miracle was me. She just didn't know it. I worked on this for months. All day, I would run my real company, then in the evenings, I ran it as a secret second project, funding and organizing my sister's wedding from the sidelines. And I felt good about it. I experienced, honestly, some kind of delight in it. Secret giving is meant to be the truest joy that exists. I had humbled every issue the family bumped up against. Whenever my mother would say on the telephone, "I don't know how it's all coming together, it just is," I loved the warm, private satisfaction of being responsible for it. I convinced myself this was enough, the secret satisfaction, the invisible giving. I told myself they didn't need to know, but I was mistaken. The wedding was about to prove it, but I had to get all 200 people quiet before I understood so much of what it was I'd been doing, and what it'd mean to reverse that. The months leading up to the wedding were a bizarre crash course in observing how a family could rejoice in something you made happen while they remained completely unaware that you'd made it happen. I went to those planning gatherings, the ones I was invited to, not all of them. I sat in my mother's living room while she and Brooke and my Aunt Linda sorted through binders and swatches and seating charts, watching them puzzle out problems I had already solved, congratulating themselves on deals I had arranged, marveling at how well everything was coming together, without once asking if somebody wasn't making it come together. I was sitting right there. The someone sat right in front of them, drinking my mother's coffee, saying next to nothing just like they expected the disappointment to do. There is one specific afternoon I keep coming back to. My Aunt Linda was looking at this venue, the one that I booked, the one to which I had a direct line, and said something to the effect of, "How did you get this place, Diane? I heard they are 2 years out." And my mom, who really had no clue, chuckled and said, "Well, it just sort of happened. I think the universe conspired for this wedding to happen." The universe. I smirked on the couch, drank my coffee, and did not say, "The universe is your second daughter, the one you are not looking at, who runs a company from an office building and does 40 events this size every year." I just smiled into my cup. The same smile I would wear at the reception, 4 months later, when Brooke called me the help. A grin from a person who knows something that the room does not. That smile held so much more than satisfied contentment, that I want to be honest about. It had a real, selfless generosity to it. I truly was glad to be giving this. Yet underneath that was something else, like a small lump you don't think to face, not staring directly at. The hope that one of these days somehow they would learn, that the truth would be told eventually and not have to come from me. That I would get to keep my pride and my hidden secret and also, eventually, be visible. All at once, without consequence, without ever having to actually rise up and claim anything. It was a fantasy. Life does not wheedle the truth out at a time that preserves your pride. To be known, you have to eventually do the scary shit and step into the light yourself. I didn't know that yet. I believed I could persist in private indefinitely and even so be recognized. I was soon to learn, in the all-hardest way possible, that you cannot. The first fracture in this perfection happened on the night of the rehearsal dinner. It was really the wedding that cracked it all wide open. The rehearsal dinner was somewhere I had nothing to do with arranging. This one paid entirely by my parents. Actually, a relatively minor financial challenge for wealthy people who could go to the limit of their means relatively easily and still have plenty of money left over. So everyone felt it has that slight strained tone as an event funded by people reaching, stretched out just a bit past their limits. I noticed these things. I could have quietly upped it as well, but I'd already reached a limit with the actual wedding. And besides, watching my family contort itself into fucking pretzels was educational in ways I never expected. Again, I was sitting on the edge, the disappointment's natural habitat. And during dinner, I got to listen as my family talked about their son. That way families do when they think the person is either deaf or too inconsequential for them to bother changing their tone around. My dad to Connor's dad, slumping with his hand in my general direction. "That's our oldest. I think just some birthday party planning an event similar. Never managed to find her way as Brooke did, but she is doing okay. Never quite found her footing. I had 40 employees. I had equity in 3 venues. 2 rooms away, I had an events team that could have catered this rehearsal dinner as a rounding error. She does all right. Like my Aunt Linda, to my mother, not quite under her breath. Is she dating anyone? This would be a good person if she found it. You panic, with those who are a little bit, solitary. And Brooke, I had snuck money to for her wedding the night before as she giggled with her bridesmaids, giving me a sidelong glance and then whispering something urgently in their ears that made them all glance at me, then quickly look away. The specific brand of cruelty of being turned into a punchline you can see coming but not hear. I don't know what she said. I'll never know. I don't mean they turned away and reflected. That didn't happen. There were still 4 people in the room who could see me but had simply avoided not looking at anyone. There was no specific choreography of this in my life, because I'm an expert at being watched. I sat through all of it. I learned to sit through things really well, and underneath the practiced calm, something was happening that I didn't yet have the words for. An incremental weightlessness, in which I was becoming smaller and smaller with every single comment by people who were literally sleeping under a roof at a celebration I paid for. The discord was getting hard to maintain. The gift and the disdain were rubbing against one another, creating a friction that was producing an unnamed force in me. On the way home from the rehearsal dinner, I sat in my car for what felt like hours in my driveway before going inside. And I thought, tomorrow she marries in the dress that I bought, at the place that I secured, around the day that I created, and then I go home and no one ever knows. And for the first time, that plan, the one I had been so proud of, my little secret pure gift, looked like a kindness to everyone else but me. I went inside. I went to bed. I told myself it will be okay. It was not going to be fine. But it was going to, eventually, be correct, which is a different kind of better. I rose early that morning, the way I always do before a big event, the professional reflex of someone whose body knows when something is being executed, but who isn't the one wielding the weapon this time. Except, I sort of was. I arrived forcefully early, telling myself it was to help, but really just the old instinct again, seeing it and checking so we knew. And it was, because my team built it and my team is the best in the region, and walking into that ballroom in the morning light before anyone showed up was like walking into one of my own works from behind. The flowers I'd approved, the layout I'd specified, the lighting design which I had approved. 200 places, arranged with the precision I drilled into my people. It was beautiful. It was mine. And in a couple of hours, the place would be crowded with people who knew nothing about it. I was found standing waiting in the empty ballroom by the events director. She's known me for years. She walked over and stood by me and stared into the room with me and said, softly, "It turned out beautifully." And then, after a moment, "Is she aware yet? Your sister?" And I said no. And she paused, not quite looking at me, with an expression I registered only vaguely then, somewhere between fondness and compassion, and said to me, "You're a better person than I am." I deflected, and she dropped it. That exchange crosses my mind often now. You're a better person than I am. I'm not sure she was right. I guess there is some goodness in everything I was doing, but even that version of what I was doing in it was not genuine goodness. It was just the open socket of my old wound, opting for invisibility because invisibility felt safe and being seen scared me. I think that the events director, who is a healthy person as I understand it, was looking at my plan to give occasionally, funded entirely stealthily using money from my sister's wedding, and see something generosity with numbers that didn't add up and being too gracious to name it. I caught a glimpse of Brooke that morning, in the bridal suite preparing. She looked stunning and nervous and excited, and for one brief moment, wearing the dress I had purchased her, in the suite at the venue I paid for, she looked at me, smiled an honest smile, the likes of which I hadn't gotten from her in years, and said, "I am so glad you're here." And I thought that the whole thing was justified, the whole secret, that one real smile. I carried that smile for nearly 6 hours, except for the wedding reception, when she called out my name in front of 200 guests and delivered a rather different one. The ceremony was perfect. I'm not going to linger on it because the ceremony's not where this story turns, but allow me a brief moment to say that, no, really, I mean actually pretty beautiful. And yes, my sister married a guy who stared at her like she's the best thing that has ever happened to him, and no, I was in row 3, not row 1, row 3, behind various family members deemed more important than me, watching my sister getting married in something I'd made happen, and how could you not feel for real giddy despite it all? It was the reception that got wild. Of course it was. Weddings show what they really are after the formalities are over and the booze flows and people start to become their real selves. Receptions. The toasts went around. The best man, the maid of honor, one bridesmaid during the rehearsal dinner, thrust on the sofa between the look and look away choreography. My father made a speech, which was about my father because that's how his toasts always went. An iffy ramble about daughters and families and pride for family, where he mentioned Brooke, the girl his eyes were completely on during this entire segment of him talking how blessed I or we were 4 times, and that me, that time as well, never once even, a fact of the passing seconds who barely felt their weight at all anymore. And then it was the casual part of the evening, the band, the dancing. Tables were part empty as people mingled. I was at table 11, speaking to no one in particular. Making my escape, I planned to stick around for another 40 minutes, the proper amount of time not to be rude, then leave quietly, the present given, the secret still hidden behind my teeth, having played my role as help. And the middle-aged woman at the next table, my mother's friend, the not-so-young lady, leaned over towards the head table in a quiet moment between songs. She had some wine, a few glasses. She was feeling sociable. Then she pointed to me, and the first question that set this whole thing into motion was asked of Brooke. "Brooke, dear, who's that? Is she with the venue?" It was an innocent question. Is she with the venue? One of your best, in a sense, and, in a sense, the woman could not know. It was what few had asked all night. As it happened, I was with the venue. The venue existed, we will call it me. I almost laughed. And then Brooke answered. And I stopped almost laughing. I have played and replayed the next few seconds countless times. And I no longer think of them as cruel, although they certainly were cruel, but more revealing than cruelty. They were reflex. The truest thing my sister could say, because they came out before she had a handle on them. They told me how she saw me from the deepest and most vulnerable place possible. Brooke looked over at me. She registered the question, and there was a quick, wordless calculus in her. The calculus of a woman being asked to explain why she has had the better life, the brighter career, when all it is really down on table 11 is this unglamorous, quiet little sister that she's spent decades being raised to see as furniture for her own waspiel day. And in that calculation, the simplest thing, the reflexive thing, the thing which preserved her image before 200 folk and cost her nothing, and was without consequence since I wasn't important enough as a target, was to turn me into a joke. She laughed, lightly. A laugh that could be seen as dismissive, the kind you give to a question that isn't even worthy of a real answer. And she said, "Oh, her? She's just the help." And the woman who'd asked laughed too, unsteadily, and a couple of people at tables nearby heard it, and there was that rippling laughter you get in a social group when something is said by the bride on her wedding day. It must be funny if the bride was laughing, equals, it must be all right. This is the stuff I never predicted. It was fine. The laughter didn't quite catch. Because of the something in how she had said it, that pretended contempt of it, the just resequenced wrong in the room. 200 people may not know who I am, but they can recognize the sound of someone being cruel to someone smaller than she is. And a wedding should, ideally, be its remedy, and that dissonance carried. The laughter dies faster than it began. Then the silence came in its wake. 200 people processing a bride humiliating someone for no reason, rendering them unsure of how to proceed. Then stayed in that silence at table 11. And for the first time ever in my 11 years of building my company, probably longer as the family disappointment, the old plan, the secret gifting, the people-pleasing invisibility, the melting myself away so everyone could remain comfortable, had finally run out in full. And now, this is what cracked open in that silence. For my entire life, I had been allowing them to write the description of who I was. I even made my success a secret, to do what they asked of me, to defend their portrait of me. I had paid for this entire room, and I had organized to take no credit at all, just so my sister could stand in the exact spot she was standing in and feel as important as she felt. And that she had used that very position, the one that I built for her, to call me the help, in front of 200 people, with a laugh. And I was done. Not angry done, clear done, the clearest I had ever been. I reached into my bag. I took out my phone. I stood up. The quietest thing I have ever done was stand. I want to talk about the physical reality of it, because that matters. I don't do speeches at a wedding. You are not someone who causes a scene, demands attention, takes the stage. I am the one at table 11 with a gray blazer who showed up to disappear. And so as I stood up, in silence, just simply rising to my feet, no drama, this heavy went where it wouldn't have gone. The standing up by the quiet ones matters. The room felt it. I heard the rustle of 200 faces, saw Brooks slip-turned toward me and half-returned to her own humor, grinning but not yet realizing she'd just been guffawing herself to death. I had my phone in my hand. It was an email, and I have to tell you why that specific email magically appeared. Because it was a fluke, the kind of fluke that still sends chills through me weeks later. My business partner Tomas, who had run the credits and various expenses for the event that morning before the wedding, was sending me an email with the last reconciled version of the invoice. Everything is fully itemized: venue, catering, florals, the dress. It all lists everything with my company letterhead at the top and my name as founder and authorizing party on the bottom. He'd sent it because we reconcile every event, and although this was a gift, it still flowed through the company systems and had to be reconciled. I'd glanced at it in the car. I hadn't deleted it. It was right there, open on my phone, the whole truth of what I had done, itemized and official with my name on it, which is why when I get up, there was nothing to compose. My speech did not have to happen. The single most destructive document I could have had in my hand, so to speak, the receipt, the proof, the entire secret, in line items and totals, on the letterhead of a company that nobody in my family had never asked the name of. I looked at Brooke. I glanced back at my parents at the head table, my dad bewildered, my mom already half out of her chair with the instincts of a woman who knows where something is going. I glanced at the silent 200 guests, and I, somehow not shaken though my voice shook, said, "Well, since the help was brought up in front of everybody, I think what the help did should be shared with the room." And I started to read. I read the letterhead first, my company name, a name which meant nothing to my family, and, as I could see elsewhere in the room, immediately meant something to a couple of the guests, because here was a room full of people who could afford a wedding like this, and some were exactly the sort of person that had hired one of my type companies, and they knew it on sight, and watching recognition move across several faces like a current. Then I read the line items. I read some more, slowly, clearly, in that calm voice I use with clients as I walk them through a proposal. The venue. The full buyout of the event my aunt gushed about, supposedly arranged by the universe. I read the figure. The catering. 200 guests, the entire menu, the open bar. I read the figure. The floral design, the lighting, the production. I read the figures. And then, because I'm human and she had laughed at me while pointing her finger, I scrutinized the last line in particular. The dress. The designed gown which my sister was wearing at the time. The sample sale miracle. I read how much it had really cost. I read who had actually paid for it. Then I read the bottom of the invoice. The total. And under the total was the line that read, "Authorized and paid for by," my name. My full name. The disappointment's name. The help's name. My name printed on the bottom of a wedding invoice that I had paid in full. I looked up. The silence had changed quality. It was no longer the silent strength of a room that had contained even the smallest cruelty. The quiet of 200 people reworking everything they thought they knew about the woman at table 11. And, more heartbreakingly still, everything they'd just learned about the bride who'd called her the help. Brooke's smile was gone. I have heard smiles drop as you hear the sound of the collapse. She understood. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to know that the soul she had just dismissed behind her in front of 200 people was the very same person who fucking gave her those 200 people. The venue, the dress she was wearing, the day she was standing in. Now my mother was back in both of her own shoes. My dad looked pale, as if he had never seen his face like this. My Aunt Linda was covering her mouth, and I put my phone in my purse again. I have a small clutch for myself. And I said, to the room, with that same low voice, "Congratulations, Brooke. I really do mean that. It was a beautiful wedding." A pause. I should know. So I walked towards the exit, through that silence, past 200 people who were going to be telling this story for the rest of their lives. Most of what transpired in the room would be recreated for me days later by a few who contacted me. Guests who knew me and attained my information via recognition of the name of my company to tell me what they had witnessed. The reception, virtually every account states, fell apart. How could it? The bride had humiliated her sister in public, and the sister turned out to be the secret planner, architect, financial backer of the whole wedding. There is no toast in existence, or song you can sing, or cake that can make a room better after that. There were people looking everywhere and unsure a carefully woven social fabric in which we all agreed to celebrate. That large hole had been ripped completely. And you could never sew it up. Apparently, Brooke tried to follow me, but her new husband Connor stopped her with what the rest of us could only presume were effective words no one could hear, but that at least landed hard. At that moment, by all accounts, Connor was not on her side. On their wedding day, within the first few hours of a marriage, Connor had just witnessed his bride do a thing that spoke something to him about her existence, perhaps something he hadn't known until then. Reportedly, the expression on his face shouted man recalibrating. My father said nothing. The man who for 20 years had asked me what I was going to do with my life sat at the head table and said nothing. He could not say, actually, anything that wouldn't make it worse. And to some extent, even he knew it. And my mother left. She did not stick around to run the room or soothe Brooke or engage in the damage control needed by their family image. So my mom gets up, away from the head table, and walks out of the ballroom, comes looking for me. She spotted me out in the parking lot. I was not crying or shaking, but standing at my car. A good car. A car I should have let tell them something years ago if any of them were looking. In the evening air, letting desperation bleed away and experiencing that hollow stillness that comes only after accomplishing one of those things you've spent the last couple long, hard years needing to get done. My mother crossed the parking lot toward me, and I braced myself because this was her coming to do what my family did: manage me, tell me I had crossed a line, ask how could I sew something like this to Brooke on her wedding day, make me the bad guy one more time. That is not what she did. She stopped in front of me, and she gazed at me, gazed really as I don't think ever before. This entire careful, baffled distance gone like it was always pretending to be there, and her eyes were wet. And she said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." "No," she said. "Because, I had no idea about any of this. The company, what you built. I knew you had a job. I never—" She broke off. Her voice wasn't working right. "I never asked. I never once asked you what did you actually do in 11 years' time. And you built that. All of that." We settled into my living room, and I said to Linda that it was the universe we sent to book the venue. Her hand went to her mouth. "The universe. It was you. And you were the whole time, and I call that the universe." I didn't say anything. I didn't have anything yet. I had rehearsed 1,000 versions of this moment, and this was not one. I'm not going to defend your sister. I'm not going to stand here and ask you to forgive what she did because it's completely unforgivable. And I need you to understand that the not seeing you she did that, but I taught her how to do that. I did that. She learned that from me. I spent your entire childhood staring at Brooke, looking beyond you. She pointed at you tonight because I had pointed at you all my life, just not so loudly. She was now crying, openly, a woman whom I had never seen cry. I am so sorry. I am so deeply sorry, and I cannot ask you for anything. And this is the thing about that moment, the thing that caught me off guard most. I had spent 11 years crafting a life that was independent of them. Walked free, finally, wholly freed from wanting any of them to see anything in me at all. And there my mother stood in a parking lot, and I saw myself, completely, for the first time. And then I don't know exactly what happened, other than that I had never stopped wanting this. Not the revenge, not the reveal. This. This is my mother's tears, and the things I didn't know to say, but also those spoken truths that lie between us at last. I told you that you can ask me for one thing. She waited. Ask me what I do, I said. Ask me about the company. Nobody ever asked. Then there was the moment I found my mother, who had just left behind, in tatters, her family and her mascara on the night of the wedding of her other daughter, in a parking lot, asking me what I did. And I told her. Every word of it she heard. You have been here enough times to deserve to see where we all landed. Brooke and I are not close. We may never be. Weeks after the wedding, she sent me a message. Long, sometimes defensive, at times heartfelt. A sound file of someone who is forced to be introspective, but doesn't quite like what she sees, and not quite sure whose fault that is. I read it. I haven't fully answered it. The windmills turn to blades again. Some things take longer than a text. And from the bridges you've burned, you'll just have to gather the pieces, because I haven't decided yet. It's okay not to have made up your mind. It's one of the few things I kept from that night. I can take my time. She did keep the wedding. I mean, I want to say it that way because people think I've unsent a payment somehow. They act as if they've had their money back from me, and they haven't. I don't pay any you sent. She married Connor. She has the pictures. She has the memories. The day occurred and was perfect and belongs to her. I gave her a real gift. It was a gift, and the fact that she stood there in the middle of it all to call me the help doesn't ungift it. It just means it was finally signed by me. Connor and I, somehow, maintain an amicable relationship. He contacted me separately to repeat his apology for apologizing, offered in a way I can only respect, and we've remained in touch lightly. I think he's good for her, but I think that he could be the one that turns her into someone better than the family made her. I hope so. I am allowed to both hope that and stay far away from that. There was never a closure with my father, and I have made peace with the idea that there likely never will be. He never asked me about the company, and still, even after all that, he has not asked. There are those that cannot rewrite the narrative, despite reality blowing it up in front of 200 witnesses. I no longer wait for him to. That was one more item I kept, permission to stop waiting. And my mother. Me and my mother are, so slowly but surely, building something we both never had. Now she really asks me about my work and listens and remembers and follows up. She came to my office. She met Tomas. She walked in through the operation I had constructed within her abandoned focus, and she cried again, silently. The good kind, the proud kind. We're not paying back 30 years. You can't. But we are building the next 30 differently, and that is somehow possible, and clarifying, and sufficient. This is what I am getting now that did not get on awful October day in between the ballroom and my gray blazer on which I had planned to disappear. I believed supporting in secret was more loving. To pay for the wedding, take zero credit, and allow them to keep their nice story about who I was. I thought invisibility was generosity. Invisibility is not generosity. It's fear. fear of standing up, being seen, taking your space. I had hidden my entire self, base level, to appease other people, and called it love. And it wasn't love. It was the same lovely gift wrapped in a showbox, but this time, it was an unhealed, open wound, bleeding. The loving action, the loveliness that was loving to me, which matters, which has always mattered, was to rise. To read the invoice, to expose the room to just who that help was. Not for revenge, for truth. You cannot be in authentic relationship when they do not know you. You cannot be known if you refuse to be seen. You can keep making yourself smaller, but that is not generosity. An invoice also tells no lies, as does DNA. That invoice told the room what my family had denied for 34 years, that the provider was indeed the disappointment. No, that the backdrop had been supporting the entire production, that just the help had built the very room they all stood in. But here is the other half, which I learned in a parking lot from my sobbing mother. Nobody can gift you with being seen. It's something you have to take. Then you have to stand in the silence and say, "This is me," real loud. Even when your voice shudders, even when giving up that comfortable invisibility you had been hiding in. And the standing up is everything. The standing up is everything. If you are not the person that this story was first written for, if you are a kid who is quiet, disappointed, the one your family gave up on making a decision about long ago without looking back again, do these two things I have asked of you. You must subscribe for these stories to continue finding you, because there are people in these comments who have been at table 11 their entire lives. And please know, you are so much less alone than the silence wants you to believe. And tell me below, tell your age, and then whatever thing that you could stand up say in a quiet place, allowed to be made visible. Just one thing. Write it down. Make it real. I read every one. This week, a woman who was told by her family for 8 years running that she had been the wrong kind of person in the room they sat around every holiday, until she learned the very house they gathered in had belonged to her and always had. We would not want to miss. So glad you stuck around. Stand up. Be seen. It's yours to claim.